So before we move to our next plenary session, we're going to hear briefly from Linda Beckmann, who's an anaesthetist at the Royal Brisbane Women's and Children's Hospital. She's the airway lead there, and she's the current chair of the Airway SIG, the sort of tripartite. The SIGs are an anaesthetic initiative which has got a sort of tripartite governance structure between the College of Anaesthetists, the New Zealand Society of Anaesthetists, and the Australian Society of Anaesthetists. And they're groups that are designed to facilitate and engage with anaesthetists with special interests. And Linda is the current chair. Since the inception of Safe Airway Society, Linda's been the consummate ambassador, welcoming the Safe Airway Society into a space that was previously occupied largely by the Airway SIG, which had tried, but for obvious reasons, hadn't necessarily achieved great engagement with specialties outside of anaesthesia. And we all believe, and I hope and think Linda shares this, that collaboration between Safe Airway Society and the Airway SIG is going to further the interests of building an airway community that extends beyond anaesthetists, which reflects how airways are managed in Australia and New Zealand. So we've invited Linda to take a few moments to discuss the current initiatives of the Airway SIG. So thank you, Linda.
Thank you. So thanks very much for having me along this morning. I guess I wanted to speak today about just two projects that we've been working on. Both works in progress, but hopefully of some relevance to you all. The first one is difficult airway databases and an airway alert project. And the second one is the airway leads that Adam's already alluded to. So I think really all airway practitioners recognise the importance of having critical airway information to reduce and prevent harm. Previous difficult airway management is obviously the single most accurate predictor of future difficulty. And as long as I've had an interest in airway, there's been this idea of having a point of care airway database, I guess ideally as an app that clinicians could use to retrieve the details of previous management. As we know, many hospitals have notification type systems or flags, even alert bracelets that might get put on a patient as they arrive. But they're generally limited to a particular health location or health service. So there's many different types of airway databases or registries, but what I've just described there is what we call a patient protective airway database. And I guess motivated by making airway management safe. Despite this being a fairly simple concept, there's lots of complexity around the delivery of this idea. And if you can bear with me for a few moments, I'll go into a little of the background of what the places are using and then circle back to where we are in Australia and what the SIG is trying to promote. So there's been some uptake in the US, Canada, and also in New Zealand for the Medical Alert portal. Medical Alert provide their own difficult airways and they have an option for direct data entry into the patient notes where they can be scanned in. So you maintain the availability of that data, though the patient needs to pay an annual subscription fee. And in many cases, that's not a sustainable thing and reduces the overall robustness of that system. In the UK, the Difficult Airway Society, or DAS, have financially backed its own database. And that's a dual purpose database, both for disseminating patient information, but also for research. It requires a hospital to sign up to the system. And I think in the UK, about half the hospitals have done that. And it leaves some leeway as to who warrants the generation of an alert. It does require patient consent to sign up and ideally relies on the patient producing this card that you can see with that unique health identifier at future encounters. And then the accessing clinician to get into the database also needs to be registered with DAS. So it makes it a little bit less suitable for interdisciplinary use. So I guess it's just important to note that the type of database I'm talking about and that we're working towards is different to other difficult airway databases or registries that focus more on epidemiology and etiology. So the purpose of these types of databases is to document airway practices, outcomes, and then use that information to globally inform how we might alter or improve our care. And a familiar example for people would be the Australian and New Zealand Emergency Department Airway Registry. The difficulty for us in Australia is our strict data and patient identifier privacy and privacy laws, and the need to have an ongoing financial source to support the database. So I still think it is a noble goal to have this patient protective difficult airway database that can be accessed point of care. But this goal to have something as a nationally integrated system is really somewhat unobtainable for us in Australia just at the present time. And our only real option for meeting our strict data laws would be to use the National My Health Record. So we are progressing this agenda with the Australian Digital Health Agency, but it is tricky and slow, and the work is sort of ongoing on that point. So I guess realizing that that was more of a long-term goal, we took a step back from that and looked at some smaller, more achievable goals. To make this Australian National Airway Database work, we obviously recognise that the information that we put into it would need to be consistent and standardised. And at the time we were beginning to appreciate this with the SIG, my own hospital was looking to update its difficult airway documentation. And the anaesthetists from another local hospital in Brisbane were also reviewing their airway alert project as well. And at that other hospital, they'd unfortunately had a patient that had died in their emergency department from airway management because the information from previous difficulty wasn't immediately available. That was about 2019, and we set up a core working group within the structure of the Queensland SwapNet organisation, which is a collaboration between public hospital anaesthetic departments in Queensland. And we also brought in a handful of airway experts from across Australia. And what we set about to refine was really what is at the heart of airway difficulty, and to try and streamline a document. There was a balance between being brief, but also containing enough detail to inform future care. So we didn't want people to skip bits by it being too complicated. But we recognised that if we had something that was defined and uniform that we could record in the medical record and then disseminate it, it was the key kind of outcome. So this is the document, and it was really agonised over at every level. Definitions, graphics, the amount of free text space, and it's well supported by a background document with definitions and also information about when an alert should be generated. One of the group leads in this project also got really deep into the digital language used in electronic health reporting, and they ended up adding new terms into the SNOMED CT, which is kind of the electronic health dictionary that would better represent a difficult airway. So the result has been a form that's now endorsed by all major anaesthetic societies across Australia and New Zealand. So that's the ASA, the NZSA, and ANZCA as the standard way to report a difficult airway. There's an ANZCA branded version of this form on the ANZCA website that anyone can access. And while I guess the majority of airways that are difficult airways that occur outside of theatre are often that way because of clinical circumstances that perhaps won't be present at future encounters. If the difficulty is due to something that is unlikely to change, any airway practitioner can use this form to generate an alert. So while we recognise the limitations of relying on patients to recall this information, and particularly if it's occurred in a critical illness kind of setting, we do help all our patients add their difficult airway information onto the health apps on their smartphone. It's just another layer of depth to the system. So while it's a shame that in this era of systems and data, we haven't solved the database problem, I guess the motivation remains high to do so, and we're still working towards that. All right, the next project is Airway Lead. And this was first established by SAS and in the UK after their national airway project. New Zealand followed in 2018 and Australia about 2019. And the idea of this Airway Leads is to have an airway representative for every hospital. So the local airway lead is then supported by a state lead who is a nominated member of the SIG executive. So it creates this network of support and collaboration. The role of the lead is broadly for local airway education and training, implementation of best practice from guidelines. So I guess addressing the safety gap between what ideal and actual practice is, ensuring there's appropriate standardization of airway equipment and not just within the theatre complexes, but ideally all areas where airways are managed within a hospital. Also to collaborate with intensive care and emergency departments. And I guess for those of you in public, especially in larger public teaching hospitals, if you don't have visibility over who the anaesthetic airway lead is for the hospital, you can certainly get in contact with the anaesthetic department director who should know the contact name of the person if there is one. The role also includes, those last couple of points there, overseeing audit, reviewing and supporting people after difficult airway management or adverse outcomes, and supporting the standardized approach to the difficult airway alert that I was mentioned then. But I guess more than those really prescribed roles, I really see the person as someone who has the interest and the enthusiasm, who's an approachable person, who's sensible, and kind of acts as the go-to person for all things airway within the anaesthetic department and the hospital more broadly. I fill the role in my hospital, and I guess it's rather than, having a formal list, it tends to be quite an organic role. People come to me when we're out of certain types of equipment. We look for appropriate replacement. We might, think about new equipment trials. People frequently reach out after something has gone not so well with an airway. Even if it wasn't dramatically awful, just to talk through, how it could have been done better. I certainly coordinate some difficult airway case presentations within our department. And if there are any new guidelines or any new information that come out, we look at how to make that a reality. So the person has to be up to date, but they can lean on the group of leads for help on that front. And I guess more importantly is someone who's got the time and the headspace, is approachable and is eager to take on the role. The group of leads within each state are encouraged to collaborate. And this works quite well if it's done in an informal way because everyone's busy. It also works well if some of the leads start to get to know each other. So for our Queensland group, we use WhatsApp. I send out an email probably 3 times a year with big ticket items. So, big guideline updates and new information. But the chat's good for things like equipment shortages or how to tackle a particular problem. Certainly on that front, the standout success has been the Victorian and Tasmanian group, and they regularly chat and they've made a decision to meet once a month, and they do journal club and case presentation. New Zealand are also going really well, and they have a strong group, and they actually meet at Airway League days. So it starts to get that sense of community as people start to get to know each other. I guess it hasn't all been smooth sailing. Some of the difficulties have been with filling the roles, particularly in some of the states. When we started, for me in Queensland, I reached out to every public hospital department director, and we had a lot of previous airway fellows come through, and I reached out to all of them as well. So I made sure that we had someone in place for all our public hospitals. And it really needs, I guess, that state lead to help drive that. Some of the states are still a little bit underfilled. It's also difficult to get into private hospitals as well, just because of the staff movement and not having consistency. So I guess with airway leads, there's no doubt there's more to be done. But I do see great benefits from the network. It's great for sharing ideas and successes and just supporting the rollout of new information, and sharing problems and coming up with ideas for interdisciplinary collaboration and meetings. So thank you very much. That's all I really had to share with you today. Thank you.